How does an INFJ become healthy? That's a question that I was asked by a viewer recently, and I thought that was an interesting question to return to, because this whole idea of health and unhealth is, it's a tangled knot in many ways, and there's lots of ways in which we might slip when we're trying to analyze these issues. Also, this question relies on a certain number of assumptions, not just about health, but about the connection between mental health and Jungian type. If it's asking how can an INFJ become healthier, what's implied by this question is that there are certain unique INFJ ways of showing lack of mental health or low mental health, poor mental health. So first of all, I think that when we're addressing this whole issue of mental health, we do need to keep in mind that like the theory of type, I think, can be a useful prism, a useful lens through which to look at the issue and potentially at your issues or at someone else's issues that you care about. But I think it comes in addition rather than sort of a standalone tool and vocabulary to survey the whole issue. It's probably wiser in the first place to consider that if you have mental health issues, talking to a therapist who won't be necessarily well versed in Jungian types, but will be able to use possibly the resources of psychoanalysis or the resources of cognitive behavioral therapy or other resources that have been tried and tested by practitioners over the decades and centuries. It's probably the first avenue to explore, and it might involve just like a talking therapy, where you kind of explore aspects of your childhood and how everything connects. And it can be a long journey, but it's usually quite beneficial. I think that the question of type is something that comes on top of that and can inform your particular case further. It's true that nowadays there's probably not a lot of psychotherapists who use that particular model, and that can be seen, I think, as a missed opportunity. It can be seen as something that is a shame and could contribute to significantly enrich the therapeutic experience. It's something that I'm myself, a trainee psychotherapist at the moment. If or when I do open up a psychotherapeutic practice, I certainly will be considering using that additional lens of Jungian type to consider, in the case of the INFJ, and to return to this particular question, consider that mental health and the struggles that people have with mental health exhibits different kinds of patterns that are shared by different kinds of people. When we talk about depression, when we talk about anxiety, when we talk about low self-esteem, when we talk about self-doubt, paranoia, lack of motivation, lack of desire, and many other things. The lens of type is, and now applying this specific lens to the INFJ case, is useful because it will take into account something extra about the person that would otherwise not be taken into account. Okay, so maybe someone is suffering from depression or low self-esteem. The two come together: anxiety, lack of focus, lack of motivation, emptiness. Okay, but we might be tempted to put certain tags on these mental health issues. But what are the uniquely INFJ ways that this person is experiencing these things? So, the INFJ concept in this case, it doesn't define the mental health challenges of the person, but it gives them a certain kind of color. It gives them a certain kind of texture. And so I think that if we were to look at INFJ health from that perspective, we might ask certain questions. And of course, in the course of a therapy, self-therapy is not necessarily the best thing to do, as you know, but there are certainly things that you can still ask yourself as to begin with, and as a possible prologue to engaging in more formal and formalized types of therapy. So if you're an INFJ and you're asking yourself the question of your mental health, and perhaps you're thinking that you're not very mentally healthy, you want to do something about that, often, of course, it will manifest as anxiety or depression. Maybe anxiety is the sort of easiest kind of example to use. If you just feel like you have higher than average anxiety in situations where you shouldn't. What does that mean from an INFJ perspective? So here I can offer clues, and of course those clues will be influenced by some of the deep theorizing I've been doing on INFJs in my books, The Ecstatic Soul and The Infinite Soul. You need to understand yourself as an INFJ and what kind of INFJ you are. So the Freudian theory of fixations, I think, is very useful to try to sketch my mental health map for INFJs. So, of course, always keeping in mind that health, including mental health, maybe especially mental health, is a continuum rather than a dichotomous kind of situation. So there are various degrees of health versus unhealth. There's no absolutely healthy INFJ in the same way there's no absolutely unhealthy INFJs, but there are gradations. There's a continuum there. So Freud talked about being fixated at certain stages of early development, right? So having an oral fixation, an anal fixation, a phallic fixation, an Oedipal fixation, and so forth. Of course, those fixations entail regressions, that is to say, modes of behavior that in the face of a particularly anxiety-inducing situation, so the situation induces anxious feelings, the person is automatically, the psyche of the person regresses to a certain mode of interaction with the world, a mode of envisaging other people, other objects, according to patterns of behavior and defense mechanisms that belong to these earlier stages. So it's maladaptive, but the person can help themselves because for some reason that is what they trust most, even if it's maladaptive. And resolving mental health issues can, to some serious extent, involve working on how to regress less and rely more on the ego resources that you have in the here and now rather than its archaic modes of defense, right? We can speak of fixation similar in the case of the INFJ personality, but instead of speaking of an oral fixation or an anal fixation, these kinds of more traditional classical Freudian terms, I think in the case of the INFJ personality, we might talk of a compliant fixation. If you remember that the adaptive submissive INFJ, I also call the compliant INFJ. So perhaps an INFJ might have a compliant fixation. In fact, I think a lot of INFJs do, or a solipsistic fixation, right? These would probably be the two most common types of fixations, and their concomitants, regressions. That is to say that whenever faced with a situation that is anxiety-inducing to a degree that is felt at some level to be not tolerable by the INFJ, they will tend to regress toward compliance, or they will tend to regress toward withdrawal, that is solipsism. It's not satisfactory as a strategy for the INFJ because they will, in the first instance, they will appear to have solved the problem. Anxiety will reduce, okay? So if you defensively comply, in the first instance, you'll get calmer, you get more relieved that something terrible is not going to happen to you. Or if you withdraw, same result. Hence why you derive as an INFJ a certain benefit from that particular kind of strategy. In the long term, the issue is it can make you feel stuck, right? It can make you feel stuck. It can make you feel like you're not growing. It can make you feel like this fixation is too rigid and it prevents you from having the required level of adaptation to truly flourish in the world, because essentially, we are born into the world in such a way that if we want to be happy, we have to flourish. And any mode of rejection of the world means that you're not going to flourish in the world as it is, and therefore you're not going to be happy. Either in a kind of very conscious, very alert sense, like in the case of the compliant regression of the INFJ, where the INFJ becomes kind of a people pleaser, but unlike more quote-unquote natural people pleasers who actually derive pleasure from pleasing, INFJs don't really derive pleasure from pleasing. They really derive just this like relief from fear of being assaulted at some level. Their ego being assaulted by the outside, including these other subjectivities that you feel you have to pacify in order to keep them at bay. So it's a form of compliant regression that the INFJ feels is not natural to them. It doesn't even really bring them the pleasure of pleasing. It only merely brings them the relief of not having to face the world and to face it head on. And with that awareness also comes, of course, a reinforcement of low self-esteem, because in a sense you know that what you're doing is not really conducive to flourishing. It's not conducive to your self-assertion, self-affirmation as an individual. You're not really authentically allowing your individuation to express itself. So you're doing this because it's like the least bad thing that can happen to you, at least that's the way you envisage it. But ultimately, it's not going to help your self-esteem. And ultimately, that actually could make you depressed, right? Because you're going to feel stuck, not only in terms of how you perceive yourself, but the various things that in life that would be required for you to do if you are to achieve them. There are certain jobs that you can do, or certain activities you can engage in that you cannot really successfully tackle in the mode of compliance. If you want to be enterprising, for example. I'm not saying that you need to be an entrepreneur, but anything that requires to be a little bit daring, a little bit enterprising, just making a leap and leap into the unknown, trying things, exploring things. Well, the more compliant your defenses are, that is to say, the more compliant your regressions are, the less you will allow yourself the particular coping styles to manage that. So yeah, you're going to feel stuck. And in the case of the more solipsistic kind of fixations and the solipsistic kinds of regressions, because if a regression is always literally just back to back with a fixation, your anxiety will be felt a little bit differently. At first, the basic choice of the solipsist is that they see the world as hostile, and since they don't want to feel like they're merely a third party, like an actor of their own life, like the compliant INFJ, the way that the compliant INFJ experiences their life and the lack of authenticity that comes with that, the depersonalization that comes with that too, which will be a more neurotic kind of depersonalization, or a psychotic kind of depersonalization. But it's as if the solipsist is rather inclined to say, well, I want to remain the actor of my life, but therefore I will be the actor of my NI world, not the actor of external reality. And that is fundamentally not satisfying to the solipsist, because it is a regression. It's contrary to the basically innate and inherent human need to be in the world, socialize with others, and change things in the world, right? So basically the mode of defense by withdrawal is also going to ultimately lead to the INFJ feeling increasing anxiety and potentially depression from this idea of being in a rut, from this idea of being being stuck, even if they might convince themselves in their everyday discourse that they're making the right choice, that what they're doing is the right thing, that they are being authentic to themselves, that being world denying is their philosophy. There's all sorts of ways one can justify these behaviors to oneself to avoid too much cognitive dissonance. But the anxiety that would manifest, or the low mood that would manifest, will tend to be a way for your body, your psyche and your body to kind of raise an alarm bell and kind of tell you, you're not really living your life to the full here. You're not really exploring your full resources. You can really see sometimes certain forms of anxiety and low mood as a sort of wake-up call that your body and your psyche together are basically imposing on you so that you wake up, and So that's not to be underestimated. Now, that was a sketch of how one might think of mental health of INFJs from this Jungian perspective. Now, I haven't really looked at ways of really addressing this toward better health, so I will do this in a later video because this video has lasted for a while. Like I said before, I've explored more on these topics in these two books, The Infinite Soul, my latest book on the INFJ Life in the Modern World, how to live an authentic, fulfilling and fruitful life while remaining INFJ to the core. That's the Infinite Soul. And the Ecstatic Soul, the previous book, a new look at the INFJ personality, which is the deepest investigation of the INFJ mind. What is INFJ consciousness like? What is an INFJ psyche? What's it like to be an INFJ? Get the two books at the links below, guys. And as usual, don't forget my Patreon page is the lifeblood of my channel. I really immensely benefit from your donations. You get access to bonus content, bonus videos, in-depth discussions. You can interact with me directly, suggest topics for me to cover, and many other things. Link is below. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you next time, guys. Bye-bye.